Tennessee Vols headed to spring practice here very soon within the next month. And of course, want to return to the CFP. We got Charlie Burst on the line from the Orange and White podcast. Charlie, what's going on?
Hey, Mark. Thanks for having me. As always, glad to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. We would like to run through the offense and get your takes on what could be different, what could be the same. Of course, your starting quarterback, Nico Iamaleava, is the guy, only threw 5 picks. They played pretty conservative football with him last year. What do you expect in terms of his progress here in 2025?
Cool. That is a very good question. Obviously, I would hope to expect a big step forward because you saw, I think, at the end of that season against Ohio State, yeah, it was a butt kicking all the way around. But I think what you also saw was some serious fight from Nico in that game that was, to me, exciting. And there wasn't a ton of good stuff to take away from that game, but I think that was one of those actually good pieces. And so hopefully he builds on that and continues to get tougher, because I think throughout the season last year, you saw he would take a hard hit. This happened against Alabama. He wasn't playing great, took a really hard hit, and then suddenly he's playing better in that second half, and he goes on and wins that game. And that happened in multiple games. And maybe if he can take that mentality, build that toughness, build that maturity, build that leadership, and just keep getting better. Because I think you've seen in preseason lists and things like that people aren't believing in him all that much compared to, he was a 5-star at all everything coming out of high school. And then I think people just had crazy expectations. And when I say people, like national media and Tennessee fans both had kind of crazy expectations for a kid who's just a redshirt freshman. And, so few guys go out there and are Johnny Manziel in a redshirt freshman year. Like that is so rare to happen. And I think you saw just a normal, good quarterback progression out of him. And so I think the expectations that I would have are to just build on what we saw, make it that much better, show that toughness that you showed in the Ohio State game when kind of you were getting your teeth kicked in and you really still, fought for yards, fought for your team. And hopefully that becomes, something exponentially better than what we saw. And maybe the change in the wide receivers might help too.
And absolutely. So, yeah, Nico was the one option Tennessee did have in that game against Ohio State that was gaining some type of success against the Buckeyes on defense, was him just keeping the ball and being the athlete that he is. You mentioned, Dylan Sampson, of course, gone. Interested about your thoughts on Star Thomas comes in, Duke's a leading rusher, and then that's added to Deshaun Bishop and Peyton Lewis.
I think it's a good room. It kind of sets up how a lot of Josh Heupel's running back rooms have, where you have guys that you go, that's a really exciting talent. He's a kid that's shown a lot of grit, and he seems like he's good, but he's not. Josh Heupel to this point, at least in a preseason, has never had a star, a guy where you just looked and you went, oh my gosh, he's going to be a dude, and for sure run all over everybody. I mean, going in with Dylan Sampson, we knew he was good. We knew he had kind of that dog in him, but I don't think anybody knew that he was going to go into that season and be one of the best running backs in America and have the crazy campaign that he did, and especially touchdown volume wise. And so, I mean, maybe one of these three guys is your Dylan Sampson. You've seen from Deshaun Bishop. I don't think he's as talented as Sampson. He's probably not as talented as Peyton Lewis. Local kid, kind of, wasn't recruited at a high level, really. But he has shown some serious toughness, and I love the way that he runs. And I think it'll be, instead of how last year it was Dylan Sampson and then, Deshaun Bishop filling in the gaps, this year I kind of expect it to be a little more like it was in the year before last, where it was a little more of a running back by committee. 3 different guys probably getting a little more equal reps. But at the same time, Star Thomas shown promise at Duke, seems exciting, but we just don't know for sure how it'll translate. I don't want to speak that lowly of the ACC, but the ACC and especially playing behind Duke's offensive line is just not going to be the same as it will be at Tennessee. So a little bit of an unknown entity there. I I would lean towards him being the number one guy, followed by Deshaun Peyton Lewis. But Peyton Lewis, I mean, probably the fastest guy on the team, and he was a really a guy that a lot of people were excited about when he was coming in. And so I think between those three guys, you have a lot of talent, and it'll probably be Star Thomas for 2 drives, then Peyton Lewis for 1, Deshaun Bishop for 1, something like that. I expect more than Dylan Sampson for 5, Deshaun Bishop for 1, where it kind of was this season. So that's going to be an interesting one, and also interesting because the offensive line is interesting too. I'm sure we're probably getting there, but that's going to be a big factor in the run game.
We can get to the offensive line. We get Charlie Burris on the line from the Big Orange Pod. Check it out. You see Charlie's X/Twitter handle right there on the banner. You can just latch onto that and follow all of Charlie's work. Yeah, so Brew McCoy off to the NFL. I don't really understand why Squirrel White would think that Florida State's a better situation. Maybe you've got some insight into that. They did pick up 3 wide receivers in the 2025 class, including, of course, Travis Smith.
Yes, some really exciting young talent in that wide receiver room. You lost, it kind of felt like everybody that you had. For Squirrel White, I would say if you have an explanation, it's probably as good as mine. Because I think he's just looking for money, and maybe he came to Tennessee and said, "Here's what it'll be," and Tennessee went, we got other considerations. Sorry, and that is purely speculation on my part. But it's what it seems like for him to take a step over to a program that was a complete clown show this past year. It just seems odd, to go, hey, I was in the playoff. I'm going to go play for this team that only won, they win 2 games this last year?
Yes.
Yeah, brutal. So I would guess it's a money thing. And I think a lot of the time it is that. I mean, Tennessee has the guy who at the start of the season is probably going to be their number 1 cornerback. 2 days ago announces he plans to go into the transfer portal. You look behind the scenes and it seems to be purely a money thing, driven by an agent, and just kind of, hey, I know my worth and I'm going to go get it. And fair enough, I guess. But the grass is not always greener. You may end up at Florida State, and so with the wide receivers now, Mike Matthews is probably better than at least his eventual ceiling. He was a 5-star kid coming in. His ceiling is probably higher than any guy that you had out there last year. You have other guys returning. You have a transfer coming in from Alabama. And you have Chris Brazzell coming back. Chris Brazzell, I mean, he caught the winning touchdown against Alabama, but then he had drop problems, and he just didn't have the season he probably wanted to have. So I think you have talent coming back that is as good as, if not better than last year. Your depth is kind of unknown because it's either unknown or it's young guys or transfers or whatever. But on the whole, I hope it will be this. A year ago, Tennessee lost what seemed like every single defensive back on the team. They all transferred or they went to the NFL or did whatever they did. And then they brought in this fresh crop, bunch of transfers, younger guys getting playing time like a Boo Carter. And that is the best set of defensive backs Tennessee has had under Josh Heupel, it turned out. I mean, you refreshed the room completely, and suddenly they had a complete new look to them, and they were way better. Hopefully that happens with this wide receiver room, is how I would put it. But because of the youth across the board, your main returning guy in Brazzell being a guy who didn't have the season he probably wanted to have this last year, it is a tough call as to how exactly that will go. But to speak, the shape of that room speaks to probably how Nico's season is going to go, how balanced the offense will be between running and passing. A lot hinges on that. But, man, if they can get back to that explosive pass game and Mike Matthews can be a breakaway guy, or Braylon Staley can be a breakaway guy or something, that could be a complete game changer. So that is one very interested to see in this upcoming spring game. Very interested to see in the fall. If maybe interested to see if they pick up any more guys in this next round of transfers. Yeah, it's an interesting situation in the wide receiver room now.
And by extension, in regards to pass catchers at the tight end position, Ethan Davis was not the starter, but he did turn out to be freshman all SEC, caught 13 passes and a couple touchdowns. And there's a couple 4-stars coming in from this 2025 class.
Yeah, and it's gonna be interesting to see. I feel like I'm using that word a lot, but it is to see how they use the tight ends again this year, because they went with 12 personnel at different times this past season. It worked well, and then they went away from it for big stretches of time. And so, do they lean more into that if they think they need to? Is it purely situational? You have exciting young guys. Deshaun Brame is a 4-star, borderline 5-star guy coming in, and just some pieces there that I think could be really good. And Josh Heupel's offense, it kind of hinges on the tight end spot in a lot of ways, and so it's very important. And I think there you are set with Ethan Davis. I think he should be good. I mean, he's one of the more known entities in this entire offense. Beyond that, we'll see. But I mean, this past year, we had the transfer from Notre Dame, transfer from Alabama that you thought was just going to be a depth piece. He ended up being maybe your best tight end all year. So, yeah, that's another one. I think you do have a known entity there, but it's a little bit of, we'll see what happens.
Charlie used that term intriguing or interesting for the offensive line as well. So we'll get to that. Lance Hurd at this point last year was the big addition from LSU, left tackle. So he's entrenched. And now Arizona had an all Pac-12 player in Wendell Moe, and he's being added at guard.
Yeah, I've the offensive line is just such a pivotal piece of everything that Josh Heupel does, and this season probably more than any that he's had. It concerns me, but at the same time, you look across. Your two tackles are Lance Hurd, a former 5-star who had a shaky start but kind of got it together later in his first season at Tennessee. And then you have a 5-star freshman as your other tackle, presumably. And, I mean, the number one offensive tackle in America coming in. So you presume he's going to be your starter there, but he's a freshman. And so you don't know exactly how that's going to go with Sanders. And then at guard, you actually just found out this week, Andre Karich, who was your left guard this last season, was seeking another year of eligibility. That got denied. So where do you go there? Because now you maybe thought he was going to be able to come back. He's not, and you have a consideration there. But the real one to me is center. You're losing a center who was a starter for the past 3 years. A center who, when he went out with injury at times, your offense changed. And he ran it better than the other guys that are on the team. You're bringing in a transfer in Sam Pendleton from Notre Dame, who maybe, like the thought around him, I think, is that he could be center. You have William Satterwhite, who could be center. That I think this is something that's going to get shaken out in spring ball and fall ball. But man, that position is just so important on this football team. You have to get that figured out, and you have to get it figured out with the right guy. And maybe they're thinking the kid from Notre Dame because he has, a little more experience. But so far in Heupel's tenure, he's had a very hard time getting any guys that he recruited on the field at the offensive line positions, which is weird. It's to the point where it's odd. And maybe this is the year where that finally happens. Maybe it's a transfer at center. Maybe at left guard. I mean, what are you doing there? There's questions here. and questions at a position that where, when it goes wrong, things go off the rails for Josh Heupel's offense. If they can't run the ball, that's a non-starter for this offense. Everybody thinks it's a big, throw the ball over the top, fun and gun, but it's really not. It's predicated on the run. I mean, there is a big pass element in this offense for sure. It's a huge piece of it, but it's run first, realistically speaking. And so it's going to be key to see how that shakes out. That is probably the position I'm going to be watching the closest until we find out who it's going to be there. And I think they probably need to get more transfers at the offensive line position before the season begins. Not that it's going to just be, that there'll be some guy available who's going to be pick and play, but for depth, if nothing else, especially losing Carrick now, I think that's really key. So, we'll find out soon enough exactly where they go on the offensive line. But man, it's going to be a very important position this season.
Breaking down the Tennessee offense with Charlie Burris. You can catch him on the Big Orange podcast. Charlie, appreciate you stopping by and running through the offense with us.
Absolutely. Happy to do it, Mark.